for a sec. All right, my friends, welcome. First of all, not to be too melodramatic, but I love you. I feel your pain, your struggle, your desire, your seeking, your searching, your yearning, your potential. I see who you already are in that potential, what you already are, regardless of what portion of that potential you've currently got actively held within your consciousness. And there's a great unity that connects all of us. And even to say that it connects all of us is not the ultimate truth. It is all of us. But on an outward level, one would describe that. On a manifest level, one would describe that as we are, in a sense, invisibly connected. But just like all the images in the mirage, or in the dream, or in the hallucination, could be said, one being in the dream or in the hallucination could say to another, I just know we are somehow connected. And we could describe different theories, how we're all connected by filaments or strings, invisible little energetic entangled webs, and so on and so forth. But in essence, it's even more intimate, more direct than that. Oneness is not connected. It only appears that way inside the focal points of the subtle and the physical bodies, where we see different objects, and there appears to be separation. But from the vantage point of that God unity, from the vantage point of the mirage, or the dream, or the hallucination itself, the essence, the very fabric, if you will, of the mirage itself, from that point of view, everything within the mirage is one mirage. It's one with the mirage. It's not even that different points in space and time actually exist and that they're somehow connected, or that there's this web that interweaves everything. Yes, that is relatively true. But on a more absolute level, all components of the dream are actually one dream. So literally we are one. And the more an entity knows this experientially, is convinced of it, is tapped into it, is aware of it, the more that veil of separation has been penetrated, the more automatic that oneness understanding dawns, is made visible, the intangible or the subtle is made obvious. And therefore automatically, the more you know your essence, the more you know all other selves as well. And this is why I say, I love you. I know your pain, your struggle, your challenges. I know the depth and the richness of your desire. Furthermore, I know that even larger portion of your will or faith or desire, which is still hidden from you, which is still buried, which still lies latent for many of you. That depth of desire, that purity of will, that purity of desire to seek this unity, this liberation, this freedom, this truth, beyond the illusion of the surface level of this truth, which we call the world, a form and shape and size and others and self, and so forth. So yes, we are connected, but even deeper than that, we are one. We are the same essence, the same ultimate being. There's only one in the whole universe. And so each individuation needs to be honored by the self, by you, in other words, for what it is or for what it appears to be, and for where it appears to be at. Within this spectrum of digging up your potential, within this spectrum, this gradient, this field, this playing field of knowing oneself versus not knowing oneself. I've both been a fan and not a fan of the more direct black and white type of teachings as is often found in, say, Advaita Vedanta, or the more non-dual Eastern teachings. Where the premise is, typically, there's all sorts of nuances, so again, every time I'm generalizing, I don't mean to offend any particular branch of spirituality. They are all valid. There are all ways that appeal to different entities, to different beings, depending on where they're at and what their preferences or biases are. And when speaking generally, again, one inevitably loses accuracy or precision. But to get a point across, sometimes we have to generalize. So in general, these types of teachings are based on the premise that there is truth and there is illusion. I don't disagree with that statement in and of itself. And I speak these words myself frequently as well. But there is an approach in those paths of black and white that can both be helpful as intermittent tools for the student or the seeker to apply, intermittent modes, say retreat mode, for that entity to then commit itself to that particular view or approach to awakening or enlightenment, where one takes on the premise that there is only truth or illusion, black or white, truth or false, and that there's really nothing in between that needs to be paid attention to, honored, or even understood, that in fact anything in between the false and the true is to be discarded as an illusion in order to gain the quickest experiential results. Again, can be very powerful if the student is ready for this, wanting of this, and if it sort of falls into the slot of that intermittent period within the life journey of that entity, where it is most relevant for that entity to adopt that approach, that view of spirituality. For example, when one goes through some kind of a profound rebirth or a letting go or going through the eye of the needle type of stage within one's journey, where the false simply needs to be stripped off and one is ready to do so. One is ready to stand naked in the fire of truth, naked in front of God, and see how much of a shadow the individual mind-body-spirit complex still casts as a result of being exposed to this light of God, and how transparent perhaps it has become, and therefore the less of a shadow it casts when the entity holds itself in front of this light of unity. How much of a shadow does your individuated mind-body-spirit casts when placed in front of the sun of the true self. How much more of those dense layers of clothing can we strip off of our true selves, and therefore cast less and less of a shadow as we become more and more transparent, as the layer of our individuation becomes more and more a pure, transparent channel or conduit for that light of the one infinite Creator. So it's beautiful to adopt, from time to time, a radical approach, if the entity is ready for this, if the psychological attachments to the forms and the ideas within one's own mind and within one's own physical environment and within one's own relationships has already loosened up or has already been taken with a point of view of flexibility and optionality, viewing all these layers and all these attachments as optional, as choices, in fact, that the self is making for itself, and being aware that they are choices, that they are optional, that they are interchangeable, that they can be dropped without any harm being done to the self or other self. When that conviction is high, one is ready to adopt, intermittently at least, a more radical black or white approach as a means to accelerate its purification, its stripping naked of that which is false, and therefore standing nakedly, vulnerably, openly, willingly, courageously, facing directly that light of the sun, of the truth, of oneness, and unconditional love. And that in that light, it will become blatantly obvious to the entity's mind as to what layers still stand out, still cast a stark shadow. And thus then the light of God, in the practice of unity, consciousness, becoming more absorbed in the I am, etc. One will therefore expose willingly one's most hidden secrets, one's most privately kept thoughts and beliefs and emotions and beliefs regarding its vulnerability, regarding its separate appearance, its nature seemingly being separate, therefore seemingly lacking things, therefore seemingly needing things, therefore seemingly being dependent on things, therefore seemingly manipulating things to its own benefit in order to procure and secure those elements required according to the perspective of this entity, based in its belief in lack and limitation, and its belief in its separateness from the all-engulfing oneness of the one infinite you. For the most part, during this retreat, we have taken on a somewhat radical, somewhat black and white, although be it a mild, more balanced, in my opinion, version of it, a more supportive version of it, supportive to wherever you're at. And although I personally recommend to continue such an approach for as much as one is ready for that, I do in general avoid black or white speech, true or false speech, because unless one is truly ready for this, and unless one has committed oneself to sort of a monastic lifestyle, where one is indeed more isolated, if you will, more focused, doesn't have to go out to earn a living, where the community is somehow provided for, with its own sources of sustainabilities, foods, and so forth. So that the sole focus of the entity is supported by the environment that one has chosen for oneself. And those environments do exist, and or they can be created in your local communities. But unless one has such an environment, and more importantly, the matching will, because the will outshines even the environment. Ultimately, the environment doesn't matter. But you get the picture. Unless there is such a supportive environment created, that one's sole focus can be upon that constant remembrance of the true self. And one's desires for any type of worldly activity has so greatly diminished and seems so irrelevant to the entity at a genuine level of where it's at, not just as sort of a vain thought of, oh, I want enlightenment, therefore I should drop everything that I desire, and I should no longer go out into the world, I should no longer execute my projects, I should no longer interact with my family, and all that. Not out of a mental statement like that, but when it's a genuine willingness and readiness in the adept to commit itself more and more fully, almost exclusively, to the yearning, deepening the yearning for this union, and disciplining one's entire life to support that. Unless that is the case in a genuine, balanced way, these radical black or white statements are often less than helpful, except, again, as sort of intermittent periods where one takes on that approach. And the only way it really works in a balanced way, and this is often what's missing, is if people understand that they are taking on an approach. Because if I state this is true and that is false, and you have 100% faith in my words, and you disregard where you're at in your own life, in your own journey, then it's easy to make the mistake of judging oneself, not accepting these components, these parts of the journey, and albeit that they are illusory in nature, the judgment is not helpful. The judgment and the suppression, perhaps, generates more imbalances that later on need to be viewed, understood, and accepted anyway, and be brought with you into the light. So the only way that a black and white type of teaching I have found to be helpful is when approached consciously as an approach, as a view that one adopts for an intermittent period of time, a period of time that one repeats intermittently, once a year, twice a year, 3 times a year, depending on the length of that period, depending on the desire of the adept. So one has to take responsibility for the views that one takes on, for the teachings that one absorbs, and for the approach that is part and parcel of that messenger or message. And one has to understand the biases with which the teacher is teaching, the preference, the perhaps lifestyle that that teacher comes from or is rooted in, the priorities that that teacher or teaching assigns to certain approaches and whatnot. And so it is your responsibility, I wish to remind you of this, to balance the information that you hear in such a way that you make it applicable to yourself in the most radically honest and balanced way possible. You are responsible for hearing this. You are responsible for how you apply this and how you integrate this. So I do my best to, as much as possible, even when I'm emphasizing more radical approaches, I do my best to intersperse that, to layer that, to nuance that with, indeed, nuances that are aligned with maintaining a more balanced view that then remains accessible for all entities, regardless of where they are at. But there's only so much nuance I can express in every single sentence. There's only so much nuance and so much variety of entities and stages that I can honor, if you will, in any particular one of my sentences or even entire sessions. And also sometimes the power of particular teaching can be diminished or lost when those who are ready for that, who are ready for such an intermittently adopted approach, if you will, would benefit less if the radical or directness of that path is diminished by constant interjection, if you will, or interspersing of these nuances. So sometimes for certain audiences, for certain purposes, certain types of retreats perhaps, or settings, or certain levels of adepts, people already familiar with some of this content, who've already taken ownership of balancing their own lives inside and outside. sometimes to adhere and promote a more radical or direct approach can be very helpful, can be very powerful in catapulting that student by their own will and by their own efforts to a whole new level of self-identification, or what we identify ourselves with, and a degree to which we are transparent to that unity consciousness. One can adopt a very committed approach, and again, then one typically falls into a more monastic lifestyle. I'm talking about the most committed type of approaches. And at the same time, this is simply not relevant for everyone that's listening right now. And it's not where they're at, and it's neither is it where they should be, because there is a great beauty and there's great relevance in other stages of the illusion and other commitments within the illusion, at least to some degree. As long as one understands that the ultimate blueprint of this illusion, of any of the layers of illusion, any of the aspects of illusion, any of the mind, body, spirit, complex layers and levels and all that, they are all ultimately serving a much grander picture than we can see with our human eyes, with our human mind. And this grander picture, according to my experience, my view, indeed is the realization of the one infinite creator by itself, for itself, through itself, in the form of all of us. So I adhere to this view because it matches my experience. At no point should you try to mimic my view if it doesn't resonate for you. Only adopt what resonates, what matches with your internal guidance system, while at the same time being radically honest about what is your internal guidance system and what are your excuses or biases or conditioning telling you. But this is your responsibility to sift through that, to discern what that is. I cannot give you an answer of what's true, what's false. That's entirely 100% your responsibility, your honor, your duty, your joy, to assess, to decide. So this path truly is in your hands. And the degree to which you commit to a contemplative, self-remembrance-based existence is, again, entirely up to you. What you wish to devote yourself to, and to what degree you wish to yourself to it, is entirely up to you. Now, another reason I do not appreciate, in full anyway, the black or white approaches is because something I've already sort of addressed or hinted at is the many imbalances it tends to generate within the students of such paths, which can help if you have that sort of Shaolin monk type of environment where that's the sole purpose of your life. Then that's okay. Then that is part of the challenge one is choosing. But unless that's the case, it typically generates imbalances that later on need to be reviewed and understood and accepted and brought into the light with you. So hence, since my audience is very varied, and I doubt there's a lot of Shaolin monks listening to this message, and that the majority of those who listen to this message are those who have their two physical feet planted quite firmly in the Western civilization, or civilizations like it. And they have ongoing duties and responsibilities that they have accepted, that they have agreed to. And so their life is a mismatch, if that's the right word, or mixture of, mismatch, I think, something like that. It's a mixture of, a collection of, combination of all kinds of different priorities. And this quarantine period is such a perfect opportunity to become a little bit more radical, a little bit more direct with yourself, to strip away a little bit more than you usually would allow yourself to strip away, to be a little bit more radically honest with yourself than you normally would. What would normally take you 2 or 20 years now can take you 2-3 months or even less. And you will benefit of that when you come out of sort of the eye of the needle, of this collective eye of the needle experience that we're having. This collective stripping away of the non-essentials and a reorienting of our mind, body, spirit, attentions, consciousness to what's truly important, relevant, exciting, and possible. And enlightenment is definitely one of those exciting goals. To realize the self more fully, more transparently, and to attain the liberation that comes from that recognition, from that realization, and to allow to bring that forth into the mind-body-spirit complex, which happens quite naturally, quite organically, quite on its own. The effort of self-realization paces itself back in terms of clarity regarding the mind-body-spirit complex, the components within the physical and the subtle bodies and so forth. They quite naturally, as well as the shadows, they quite naturally become obvious to the seeker when one focuses one's attention wholeheartedly and honestly upon that unifying, all-healing, all-harmonizing light, which is the substratum of every experience you've ever had, ever will have. Anything that ever exists rests within this unified holographic mirage of the one infinite creator generating perceptions of consciousness, layers of it, dimensions inside of dimensions, so on and so forth. The nature of this whole illusion is, as I have expounded, according to my view, that of oneness. The degree to which you wish to devote yourself to this recognition is up to you. I attempt to encourage you. I am an advertisement for greater focus on what's true and greater letting go of what is false. I am an advertisement for greater self-courage, self-honesty, as to what one is holding on to that may not be essential to one's being. And to embrace that view and those disciplines and that focus, that remembrance of that which is essential, which is ultimately true. And to devote oneself to this, for lack of a better word, purification journey or process. That again quite naturally unfolds and happens as the entity focuses its vehicles towards the one infinite nature of all things. This is the great healer. This is the great resolver of paradoxes. This is the great guide. This is the inner guru, the true guru. As I was going to say, another reason I don't prefer wholeheartedly the black or white types of teachings, even though I don't disagree necessarily with some of the things that they propose. And although I see great value in their approach, when used consciously, knowingly that it is an approach, that it is a view one adopts, and for the most part intermittently when relevant and when exciting for the student. Nevertheless, I have my disagreements with that approach when applied to everyone in general. As it misses or fails to honor the grandness within the illusion of the journey of an individual mind-body-spirit complex or being. It is not as simple as black and white when one considers the full scope of things, the full scope of an entity's journey. When seen from a purely physical standpoint of this incarnation alone, yes, one could adopt the black and white approach, and that's part of the reason why the incarnation and the veiling process, meaning you forget everything before this experience, and all you see is physical space and time with your senses. Part of the usefulness of that experiment, which you have willingly become a part of by being born, is to be veiled, because from a veiled point of view, one can prioritize the one infinite creator in a much more radical fashion, even if it's somewhat imbalanced and untrue or incomplete. One can, therefore, adopt the view of true or false, of God and human, or God and illusion. And one could even say that an incarnation is a monastic lifestyle. It is a blocking yourself of, a forgetting, a willing forgetting of everything else available to you at higher levels of consciousness, different dimensions beyond the veil, etc. Memories that you have, prior experiences, parallel probable versions of yourself, and the list goes on. This is a vast illusion within the holographic nature of this mirage. There is no end to what can be experienced, to what divisions can be generated, to what parallel realities can be experienced or explored or generated, and so forth again. So there is an endlessness. There is a near infinity, if you will. I could even say there is an infinity to the amount and degree of diversity possible within the illusion, even though the illusion's substratum is that of oneness, of simplicity, of absolute lack of variety. It is pure, sheer awareness, love, light. That's it. But within that, out of those three primary colors of existence, if you will, those three primary agents or ingredients or active principles of the one absolute, anything can be produced. Which makes sense if you think of it. If creation, if the illusion, if this mirage of endless infinite perceptions and dimensions of viewing oneself and knowing oneself, or not knowing oneself, which is another way of knowing oneself, if this is all a representation of the one absolute infinite, if it is a representation, a symbolization of the infinite, then must its symbolization not allow for an infinite variety of expressions and free choices? It must, and it does, obviously. Hence, I'm sitting on a chair that I don't know who made. With all these pieces coming together from, I don't know where they produced that from, got that imported from, where it was constructed, where earth was turned into this chair, basically, through a variety of processes and lives and energies, just to name one example. Yes, that is all an illusion. Doesn't make it entirely irrelevant, because what's the purpose behind the illusion? The nature of the illusion is the one infinite creator. Now, we can argue all day long about what we believe is relevant and is not relevant. But from a complete type of holistic sort of view, would it not make sense that all things are, at least to be appreciated, not to necessarily be indulged in, because one will then be on an endless journey. So it's not about indulging in the illusion, but it is about adopting a more overarching view that appreciates every aspect of the Creator, even in the illusory form that it takes on. Because it is indeed an expression of the Absolute. And I believe it is indeed a vehicle for it to know itself in an infinite variety of ways, to learn about itself. Now, this happens in a way that we cannot possibly describe with our human language. So whatever I say, whatever impression you get of what I'm trying to convey is greatly, greatly distorted and simplified. But in a simplified, humanized way, we could say that the one infinite creator wanted to further know itself, know of itself, know its potential, taste its potential. And therefore, within the mirage, within what it began to dream up, within awareness, love, light, it then generated an infinite amount of variety and free will to explore all this. In seemingly endless ways. Some have called this samsara. Now again, being here on earth, being this seemingly limited physical experience, one is veiled through an intelligent process that is part of the blueprint of incarnation in this density. One is veiled from the greater knowledge of these other types of varieties that one has already experienced or already explored, and that one indeed at a higher spirit level of their consciousness is presently, currently, concurrently, simultaneously aware of, because in higher levels of consciousness, time works very different than it does for us, much less linear. In even higher densities of consciousness, there's a sort of timelessness or a foreverness or a total nowness where all of time has collapsed into a single, for lack of a better word, point or moment. Because time is part of the mirage, it's part of the illusion. One cannot say that the mirage goes through time, so to speak. It's only the images within the mirage that have a certain sequence. Their nature, their essence remains ever steady, ever the same. But somehow still this knowledge is gathered of itself. The Creator gathers knowledge of itself, by itself, through itself alone. And this, what you currently perhaps still call you, think of as you on a day-to-day veiled basis, is indeed one of those mouthpieces, one of those extensions, one of the fingertips of the Creator exploring itself. And so to simply dismiss all this, even though it has a practical value of accelerating one's quantum leaping into higher states of consciousness, into higher degrees of self-realization, nevertheless, to the overall balancing of this illusory identity that we have for so many quote-unquote lives taken on and assumed, for the sake of a balanced and consistent journey, one needs to also appreciate and honor the illusion's value. Doesn't mean you cannot know it evermore and call it evermore an illusion. You indeed can. There's no dishonoring in calling anything an illusion. As long as you know that calling something an illusion doesn't mean it has no relevance per se. It doesn't mean it should not be appreciated. Again, if it's truly an illusion, why would you depreciate it? Doesn't that give it reality? The only reason you would judge, suppress, or depreciate, devalue an aspect of the Creator knowing itself is if you do not fully believe it's an illusion. If you do fully believe it's an illusion, you are beyond acceptance and rejection. Or you could say you're in complete acceptance. But it's really beyond acceptance or rejection. If you really recognize the illusory nature of something, there's no need to push it away, is it? Except sometimes for relevant relative reasons, such as I kind of went into the other day when it comes to relationships, or one does not have to expose one's mind or body to toxic environments if there seems to be no more benefit in spending time in those toxic environments or relationships. There is a relative wisdom and discernment that is still valuable at that relative level. However, this has nothing to do with love. The love doesn't have to change. I can say no to someone offering me something and still absolutely love the wholeness of that beingness and the oneness that we share, that we are. I can avoid, if I wanted to, as many people as I possibly could avoid, if that seemed to make sense to me for some reason, if that was discerned from a place of love and wisdom. That does not mean that I do not accept the things I physically avoid or mentally avoid. There is a place for wisdom, relative wisdom. However, again, the substratum of it all is oneness, and to attain a universal love in one's understanding, a true unconditional love, is worth the effort. It's worth the transformation. It's worth the letting go of one's personal biases and preferences, which again does not dismiss the wisdom and discernment that's available to the entity to discern what is and what is not viable, healthy, conducive, relevant, exciting, etc. So, that being understood, that discernment is part of the relative experience and should also be honored, that discernment does not have to imply suppression or avoidance from a state of judgment. It's very different than discernment. So if one truly sees that all is an illusion, why push it away so hard? Why call it false? The only value in calling the illusion false, now it is an illusion in my opinion, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying it has a basis in its own reality. Its only basis is awareness, love, light, and therefore all forms are illusions, just like perceptions in your dream state are illusions of the dream state. Very, very exactly similar. So I am confirming that everything that has form and shape and size and diversity and separation and duality is indeed an illusion. It is fundamentally, substantially, not what it appears to be. One could therefore say it is unreal. It doesn't have a reality of its own. It doesn't really exist. It's not a place that actually exists. The world is not a place that actually exists on its own 2 feet. It seems that way, hence the word illusion. So don't get me wrong, there's great value in seeing things as illusory, but the black or white approach often gives the impression that because something is illusory, it should therefore be judged as not worthy or not good. And this creates imbalances within the holistic nature of this intelligently devised mind-body, delicately designed mind-body-spirit complex, call it soul beingness if you will, that has been within the illusion around for a long, very, 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 very long time. It has developed itself over many, many, many types of experiences that you do not remember. And so one should at least honor and appreciate the depth and the extent of the spectrum within, yes, the illusion. Because if one does not honor that, while one still lives according to those laws and rules, one creates imbalances, you see. So it's only if you're completely free of the appearance of the illusion, if you've completely seen through every level, every dimension of it, you're completely free of it, then for yourself you get to make such statements, because it doesn't matter. There's a completion to your journey. This is very, very rare. And so what we need to honor as teachers and students is also the depth and the spectrum of such a journey. Not to give it significance and to distract from the direct path approaches, because the direct path approaches are by far the most effective and accelerating in your journey. And while we are in this veiled, very limited 80-year lifespan state, where we sort of signed up for a monastic experience, for a limited experience, absolutely use it in a black or white kind of way as often as you can, responsibly. Doesn't mean there cannot be an undertone, a subtext, if you will, a feel of appreciation and honoring the depth and breadth of this journey. It's good to have that in your toolbox. It's good to have that as part of your foundational view of your own journey, of your own lifetime, and of your own soul's journey, if you will. I just wanted to address this, first of all. So that when you do choose to see things as false and only one thing as true, and to guide all your attention intensely towards that truth, which again is very valuable for those who are wanting that. At least when you do it now, it is a conscious choice, and you're not under the spell of false and true, or right and wrong, or black and white. You're choosing it as a method. You're choosing it as a view, as an approach, and therefore you can fully benefit from that approach without having to fall into any traps of suppression or judgment or non-appreciation of all the illusions that you encounter along the way and that you're let go of. Letting go doesn't mean judging. In fact, you cannot let go of what you judge. What you resist persists. And what you suppress just lingers in the background. Eventually, all things are acceptable. All things are acceptable. Eventually. You will see this. All things are acceptable. So nothing needs to be suppressed. They just need to be understood for what they are, illusions. And then some of these components need to be understood relatively to their own domain. And this happens inevitably if we're open to it, if we're not in a suppressive way applying these direct teachings, but in a holistic way applying these direct teachings. Then we are open also to the appearance of themes that come up for us, of sort of energetic blockages, misperceptions that we've carried for so long, that we need to spend a little bit of time honoring them as they are, accepting them as they are, understanding them, understanding the nature of the misperception, and truly, genuinely contrast that to a truer perception that's closer to the vibration of the one infinite creator. Thus then allowing that misperception not to be suppressed or judged further, but to be brought into the light with you, transmuted into a more holistic understanding that is closer in vibration, more transparent to that sun of the self. Therefore casting less of a shadow. Shadow work, or the shadows, are the result of suppression and non-acceptance or appreciation. To the truly committed adept, nothing is off the table. Everything is up for grabs. Everything is available to be appreciated, to be understood in its own timing, and to be ultimately accepted and seen as another expression and extension of the one infinite creator knowing itself. Ultimately, all things are acceptable, and all things have their place in their time, in this infinite illusion of the one infinite truth or reality. And also don't take this as an endorsement for any particular other methodology or approach that is significantly more relative in nature, or more menial in nature, or less profound or significant in nature. I definitely am an advertisement for swiftness, for accuracy, for directness, and for a radical refocusing from illusion to truth, from falsities and lies to honesty and clarity and transparency within one's own journey and within one's interactions with the world and others. So I am an advertisement for the direct path, ultimately. But I am also an advertisement for that being done with a holistic view in place, and holistic understanding that all things are acceptable, and that one should understand this journey, at least for the time being, as a spectrum, as a many, many, many millions of years, billions of years type of journey. Appreciating it like that, sinking into the essence of your own journey like that, one will begin to instinctively remember that this is not your first rodeo, my friends. This doesn't mean you have to have specific memories. I have very few specific memories of other experiences, unless they are relevant for me in that moment, or relevant for me to teach a particular topic in that moment. But I have very little to no interest in knowing anything per se about other experiences. Nevertheless, there is a deep instinctive knowledge of other versions of myself, of other states of myself that are happening simultaneous to this moment at different levels. But I don't need this particular conscious mind to know of these details, unless they are relevant, and then I will know them. That's sort of my agreement, because otherwise they just become distractions. And to be honest, there are already more than enough data points for me to be aware of, and to balance, and to approach, and to execute within this incarnation, that this particular physical mind is not designed to do much more than it already is. It incrementally increases its ability to assess data. But it is to be appreciated as being part and parcel of the illusion that it is born into. So you could say, roughly, that the physical and the mental bodies here are the product of the physical and the mental worlds, and therefore they have their limitations. Now, in my inner experience, I can go much farther than that. I can go much deeper than that, much truer than that. But when it comes to me using my subtle mental physical bodies, there is a precision or specificity, specificness of relevance to be honored, or you could say limitation to be honored. But really, it's not so much a limitation, although it is. It's more so that that limitation is the result of the desire for a specific type of execution or purpose or understanding. So also do not get lost in wanting to know all your past lifetimes, or wanting to activate all your dormant abilities or psychic powers or things like that. Don't get too distracted, if at all, by any of these things, and instead appreciate the relevance of being in this precious, limited experience out of your own choice. I know it's hard to believe, but you chose this. Sometimes it's hard to believe, but you chose this experience. So to appreciate that as part of a much greater journey, one can then fully attune oneself to being aware of, in an accepting fashion, of all the distortions that want to be experienced and learned from in this particular niche experience of the overarching oversoul of your beingness. Knowing that ultimately this is a vehicle for the Creator to know itself more fully in all the varieties that it possibly can, taste itself and know itself through. And your movie, the movie you're watching, is one such story. It is one such journey. It is one such a lesson. So one has to honor this and appreciate this if one wants to avoid causing imbalance. Appreciation is always good. Can never go wrong with appreciation. Different than fetishes or indulgences. I also don't mean to be overly obsessed with the physical body or the subtle body or ancient ceremonies or stones, rocks, crystals, and incense or vibrational music and gongs and ETs and all that. These are also just permission slips, and they are also distractions, depending on what your goal is or desire is. They can be and often are distractions to a more full knowledge of the one true self that constitutes all else. So keep your focus specific, appreciate the niche and the limitation of your physical and mental experiences, and understand that that's in no way necessarily an impediment or limitation upon your inner experience, upon your intuitive experience, upon what you can realize in your contemplations, your meditations, your intuitions, and so forth. There is no limit ever to what you can tune into, know, etc. But certain things of a relative nature within the illusion are relevant to know, and other things are not. They would be more distracting and therefore not helpful, and these are often more blocked from us. So, all things are perfect, including action against injustice. That's also perfect. Just as the injustice is perfect. And so on and so forth. All things are perfect. So this does not mean a passive life, per se. One can still use relative discernment and wisdom to act, to stand for something, knowing that it is a game you're playing between you and you. You're simply fulfilling your purpose, your side of the bargain. Okay. This is one big contextual disclaimer, if you will. Also, I just thought it'd be informative, potentially inspiring, and hopefully helping you balance certain edges out from your vibrational field. The main reason I'm sharing all this is because I got a few questions that I was made aware of from you guys of the nature of how to live this, how to balance this with one's actions, with one's dreams, with one's perceptions of injustice, with one's desires, with one's projects, with one's current active life, etc. And there is no right or wrong. It is all up to you. The degree to which you wish to focus on one thing or another is entirely up to you. Again, I am an advertisement for a more direct approach, but I'm also not opposed to including some guidance when it comes to the relative time that you'll be interacting with yourself in this illusion, And so I've made a distinction between 4 types of beings, or you could say 4 types of humans. But again, as you know, I'm not a big fan of considering ourselves to be human because it's such a weird, limited, dismissive, simplistic way of describing ourselves, especially with the connotation that comes with what it means to be human. It so does not capture what we are. So I tend to avoid that term, or sometimes even use it to speak out against it as saying that's not what you are, and don't aspire to be human, because it doesn't seem that smart to me, or that intelligent. So the 4 types of beings describe the outcome or the radiance or the expression that comes off of a being that is committed to the one infinite creator to a certain degree of directness, if you will. So this overview, it's not directly related to any of the bodies, for example, although some similarities can be drawn there. It's more a practical way of making certain distinctions to help you kind of get a fuller sense of the options that are available to you. Now, of course, there's infinite options. You can combine any of these pieces of information and pour it into your own preference. In fact, I encourage you to do this according to your own will and insight and discernment. So, but they basically describe the functionality of a being once they have accomplished a certain level of consciousness, / what their desire or focus or commitment to a greater expansive state of consciousness is like. So the distinctions I've made is the 4 types of beings. One is the person. The person we're all familiar with. It's most people before they sort of wake up, and even for some period of time after they wake up, typically. And I'll go into depth in a little bit on these. The second one being the shepherd. I've called it the shepherd, and I'll explain why in a bit. The third one being the mirror. And the fourth one, which is not that relevant for most beings, and I'm only dabbling in it myself, so I will not describe this one in too much depth, simply because it's so far removed from what's relevant for most of us in this particular incarnation. But I will mention it. So that's the gateway, or the gateway being. So we have the person, we have the shepherd, we have the mirror, and then we have the gateway. And again, these describe not so much the beings themselves, more so to a degree, but more so they describe their journey and the way they're expressing themselves and what their functionality or radiance or effect is on the world around them within the illusion. So whereas other distinctions that I've made are more about the state of consciousness that you're experiencing, for example, kind of like the bodies. This is more description of, okay, so then how can we sort of categorize or understand the functionality of ourselves as we move up this ladder and as our commitment increases, our commitment to the one. And so the person is, sorry to say, the average Joe. It is it's virtually anyone you meet on the streets. And to a great, great degree, you are the person. Safe to assume. Unless you've done so much work, but we'll get into that. There's a lot of aspects of you that are still the person. Now, this doesn't mean that your predominant orientation or intention is still commensurate with being a person. However, on a day-to-day level, your conditioning arising, you're believing in your conditioning, reacting from your conditioning and all that, is the result of the person state of consciousness. The person, but let's say someone is fully the person and not aware of anything beyond that. So someone who has not yet, as we kind of say in New Age, has not yet woken up, right? One who's completely living in sort of a bubble reality, of a personal bubble. The person is signified by, or can be recognized by, it lives its life with the purpose and functionality of procuring and securing those things that it perceives it as a separate person is lacking or is responsible for acquiring and maintaining. Now, the world that this entity is actively attempting to be of service to typically doesn't extend beyond the family. So this is your typical person with a family who, no offense to anyone who has a family and whose everyday lifestyle is doing groceries and like coming home and making food and talking about how your day was at work. That doesn't necessarily mean that you are categorized as a person. So it's not about your environment. It's not about what components are present in your life. But again, in a generalizing way, it's the person who cares for themselves, and the extension of that would, what they're of service to outside of just themselves, is the family with which they most identify. You could describe them as the most selfish of the four categories, and also as the most sort of grounded in a 3D type of way of consciousness. I doubt I even have to explain more of this. It's your average Joe. It is people as we have known them for the past few millennia or so, the large majority, at least 90%. And I'm being generous. And again, this is not a judgment. It's just a stage of consciousness. Just like there's an animal stage of consciousness, there's a human stage of consciousness. There's a the person stage of consciousness, where we're just innocently, ignorantly exploring who we are as a person. And we're dealing with the belief systems that we have, etc. So there's no judgment in that. But it's to be observed that that's the majority of human beings, or has been anyway. It's changing rapidly, but has been. The next level up, so to speak, is the shepherd. This covers a wide range of the journey. Again, this is why I prefaced all this with having you appreciate this spiritual journey as a spectrum. Don't see it as black or white, true or false. Understand that I cannot begin to explain to you and if you just ponder and contemplate the size of the cosmos, you may get a sense of your own journey. Because the cosmos ultimately is what we are in form, the manifestation of our beingness. So it's a good indication, looking up at the stars and realizing exactly how long it would take you to travel from Earth to the next galaxy at the speed of light alone will make your mind boggle and will get you into that state of understanding, sort of the spectrum, the depth within this illusion that is here, and with which you have potentially interacted for millions of what we perceive of as years, and so on. So the shepherd is that being who has awoken from the personal bubble to more or less of an extent. Again, the shepherd covers a wide range. If you're measuring this against the 7 density system, the person is the late 3rd density all the way up to late 6th, early 7th density. So this covers the majority of one's journey. Basically, it's the person who has become spiritually activated, spiritually aware of the fact that they are not just their bodies and their minds, and it's not just about them. And they have activated within themselves, speaking of the positive path, I'm not going to speak right now on the negative path, the positive path of service to others, as opposed to service to self, which one can also do in those higher density ranges. However, that wouldn't really classify as being a shepherd. So, and since I'm teaching a service to others audience, and my orientation is service to others, I'll only talk about that for now. Not because I don't want to talk about the other stuff, just because it's not relevant in this talk anyway. So, The choice then is made at some point in the person's life as they begin to awaken more and more, and their heart begins to activate more and more, and they gain more empathy and compassion and understanding. They expand their consciousness beyond just the physical. They become more metaphysical, they become more understanding, etc. A spiritually activated person, therefore, enters into the stage of the shepherd, or the functionality of the shepherd. Again, this covers a wide range of dimensional experiences. So there's great distinctions, for example, between the beginning shepherd and the late stage shepherd. However, they both share a similarity. That's why they fall into the same category in my distinction here. Because what they have in common is their intention and their desire and their functionality doesn't differ too much. It's just the way they execute it is very different in the beginning stages from the later stages. So without going too much into these stages, basically the shepherd is the entity who wants to be of service to others more and more, and does so from a metaphysically, to some degree awakened at least, to some degree metaphysically awakened consciousness, or the understanding of humility that I don't know anything from this physical point of view, really, and that there is so much more that meets the eye, and that this is not the way that it seems. All the way up to the super conscious student of spirituality. But at least there's a basic understanding that there is more than meets the eye, and one activates the desire of wanting to be of service to others, hence the word shepherd also. It is helping shepherd those who are still lost in person consciousness. It helps the persons around the shepherd pop their bubbles and awaken to their greater potential. So the functionality, this is where most of you guys would fit in, I would say, although most of you also still have a lot of personal consciousness components that you're dealing with and processing and bringing into the light and accepting and transforming and letting go of. Nevertheless, I would say the majority of the people listening now have their main focus or orientation or their baseline desire situated in this range of the shepherd. And so then what's your functionality in the world? Your functionality is one of active service, of bouncing back and forth continuously between one's inner experience and how that reflects off of oneself in the outer experience, and how one can fine-tune one's integration of love and wisdom and love, and then execute that, almost like try it out on the world. As we fine-tune, and then we go back, we bounce back inside, we use the reflections that we get, and we upgrade our understandings, and we deepen our meditation, and we give more of ourselves up to God, if you will, or to that one infinite awareness, love, light. We surrender more to that, and then we go back into action, if you will, or into expression, into shepherding, into wanting to be of service to others to the best of our humble abilities. And then we get reflections, and we learn, and we optimize, and we fine-tune, and we refine. So the shepherd covers a wide range, and it's still the individuated journey is still the biggest part of this, as opposed to the mirror, which is starting to shift. But one does not typically, almost never, I would say, simply awaken and then skip every aspect of the shepherding journey. It just typically doesn't happen. And it shouldn't be aimed for, I don't think, per se. It can be done, but I wouldn't expect this. So naturally, one will bounce off one's state of consciousness, one's understandings, one's new level of integration into another phase of being of service, of attempting to radiate one's love and light, one's understanding of oneself, and to humbly bring that forth into the world, but also daily interactions with the family and other selves that you're meeting. Doesn't have to be a grandiose thing or a dramatic thing, or you don't have to become a teacher per se. You can be a teacher just by being who you are in your everyday encounters. But nevertheless, the desire is one of radiance. Instead of the person, which is more about consuming, the shepherd is more about creating and generating and radiating. It becomes, in that sense, less selfishly oriented. Less believing in lack also. one begins to awaken to the abundance that is present in every holographic micro-cubic inch of this illusion, that every cubic inch of this illusion could power the whole universe, essentially. That there is not really a lack of anything, and therefore one doesn't have to be so overly concerned with what one consumes, gets, acquires, and secures, and maintains, and so forth. So one is more flexible with one's possessions, one is more generous with one's possessions and energy, one is more giving. One wants to be more giving. One recognizes more and more the unity, the connectedness between self and other self. This is the shepherd in a nutshell, very simplistically spoken. But this is the functionality of most adepts, of most students, of most seekers, and even of most teachers. This is part and parcel of what they do, including myself. And so, yes, there's many differences, which I won't go into now. That would be a whole other course in and of itself. There's many distinctions within that. There's lessons, specific lessons, stages, thresholds, purifications that occur that's sort of distinguish the beginning shepherd from the very fine-tuned high-level shepherd, the very balanced in love and wisdom high-level shepherd. Then there's a turning point in the life of a soul, which can be reflected in the microcosmic experience of your incarnation. But I'm speaking at a soul level beyond just this incarnation, beyond just this density or dimension. Picture yourself as a soul that moves up through those densities of love and wisdom and unity, and becomes more and more a shepherd, more and more of service in a balanced way, and knows itself more and more fully, and integrates itself more and more fully. It becomes, near the end of the shepherd's stage, it becomes the unified self, the fully integrated self, the fully accepted and understood self, the fully embodied, unified I am, mind, body, spirit complex. So the completed version, or near completed version, of the individual extension of God, having reconciled all of its experiences, all the simultaneous times and experiences, into a holistic, unified, balanced mind, body, spirit complex, or entityness. Now the mirror begins another profound shift, hence this is the third distinction, because the first important shift is from person, from self-centered, from consuming, to giving and generous and recognizing the unity of things and compassion and all that. Buddhism, in a sense, is a good example of at least the beginning stages of shepherding consciousness. Love, compassion, kindness, and so forth, as a crucial component of the whole shepherd's journey. So that's a big distinction, as you can tell, between the sort of unawakened personal bubble, self-centered consumer who's only concerned with what it can get and maintain. Not only, but there is a lot of persons are very generous as well in their own ways. But the more generous they become, and the more they actually begin to radiate with sort of a sense of spirituality and abundance and freedom and generosity and clarity and intelligence, is indicative of how much of that shepherding consciousness has awoken. So that's the first big shift, is from person to shepherd. One opens up one's doors and windows for all information to flow through more freely, to be assessed, utilized. One accepts oneself, understands oneself at a much higher level, much fuller level, and one desires at every stage of that journey to give some of that knowledge and love and light of the Creator in an ever more transparent, purified way to those that one interacts with. There's a natural love and generosity, wanting to support and help and nourish those around oneself, and where appropriate, guide or instruct when it's asked for. Now, the second major shift is between the shepherd and the mirror. And again, even though there's so many levels of shepherding consciousness, or the shepherd type of being, I'm not making a delineation between them in this particular model, because they do share the same overall functionality. It's just expressed very differently as one moves up that ladder of evolution, or the frequency ladder of consciousness, if you will. But then there is another shift that is profound enough, that is distinct, that it needs its own category. And this is, those familiar with the densities, this is the shift from 6th into 7th density. from the unified individual soul self into the universal self, or the God self. Or you could say this is where the individuated sense of I am begins to open up not only its doors and windows, but also break down its walls and its roof and its concrete foundation. So that the light which surrounds it, the light which empowers it, the light which sources the individual spark of God, is fully let in to the degree where the identity shifts from individuation to allness, or non-duality, or God. And this is profound enough of a psychological, beyond psychological, but also psychological shift, psychological spiritual shift, cosmological spiritual psychological shift, that it deserves its own category of a type of being, because also your functionality changes as you enter this phase or stage. So, the late sixth density being, or the late shepherd, who has balanced love with wisdom and wisdom with love over and over and over and over again, integrated itself, loved itself, understood itself, knows its subtle complexes, its subtle distortions, has integrated these things, and has along the way meditated more and more on the unified love and light of the Creator, which resulted in greater clarity of the patterns and of the thematic expressions and distortions and lessons and all that. Because that's what the light of the Creator does. It reveals everything. And then one sort of picks up these pieces and allows them to be transmuted into this light of God. And as one does that, one's expression, functionality of being a shepherd, takes on a more and more advanced, refined, balanced, loving, and wise approach. One becomes a balanced, unified self. At some point, this balanced, unified self who fully knows itself as an individual, mind, body, spirit, spark of the Creator, now naturally approaches the sun so closely that it starts to be grabbed by its spiritual gravity, if you will. It's a gravitational effect of the one. And imagine having your back towards the sun, this huge sun, which you're already very close to. It's right there. And it has a massive magnetic effect. You're basically being sucked backwards, slowly, slowly, but faster and faster. The more you approach, the more you feel that desire, that yearning, that inner pull on every fiber of your soul, if you will, to release yourself into the allness, to release all attachment to personal memory and identification and location and partiality and bias and preference. And you just want to merge with, you want to bathe in, you want to become one with the ocean, with the water of God, with the essence, the isness, the awareness, love, light that somehow radiates and enables everything within this holographic mirage, or this grand illusion, which is the extension or expression of the one infinite absolute. Again, remember, the first manifestation or appearance out of the one infinite absolute indescribable reality was that God state, was that combination of awareness, then love, then light, together forming the active principle of the God state, or seventh density, where light is white. It contains all the colors of all the other densities. And then we move up through those colors or dimensionalities, only to desire to be merged back into the white light, which contains all the colors, the unity of it all, the substratum rather than the forms within the substratum. So this is commensurate with a late level shepherd desiring to become a mirror. And why it's significant in it, how it's distinguished in its functionality or purpose or expression from the shepherd, is the shepherd is still focused on creation. It's still focused on interacting with the components within the illusion. The seventh density beingness, the fully non-dual beingness, Ramana Maharshi is a good example of this, in my opinion, doesn't display, at least not in an active form, in a wanting form, doesn't display a desire to mingle with the world, or to interact, or to make a difference, or to even teach this or that. Now that might happen inevitably as long as there is a mind-body-spirit complex incarnate, there will be some degree of interaction with the world. And it's also not like one has to, if one is in that state, retreat from the world. But on an inner level, if you will, on an experiential level, there's no active impetus to go about and change the world. Those might happen as aspects, as components, as sort of natural, spontaneous occurrences that are just part and parcel of the blueprint of that incarnation. But the inner experience of the mirror is that of oneness with all that is, oneness with God. And if you are in your consciousness recognizing your oneness with all that is, just imagine how that would change your desires. When one is ready to sort of turn its face away from being available to creation in particular ways as an individual with individual memory and individual thought and individual ability to convey perception and bias and all that. One now turns backwards towards that sun, so to speak, or not even turn backwards, but just surrender backwards into that light of God, because it feels that one has sort of completed one's individual journey. There is a total acceptance and appreciation for all components of oneself, and therefore there is no power in any of them. As Ra describes it, is all components, I'm paraphrasing, all aspects or components of the world of duality and polarity have been used up. They're no longer useful for this entity. There is a completed, been there, done that. So take your grandfather, assuming your grandfather is this really wise and mellow, jolly old guy who has been there, done that. His expression of love is very balanced and mild and unconditional towards the grandkids. And take that to the depths of forever, and then get a sense of that at a soul level. Imagine having explored all that needed to be explored out of your individuation, and having arrived at such a balance and unification of the individuated I amness, that now it begins to gravitate. It already matches in vibration very closely the state of total oneness or unity. But now there's a desire to really kind of like release any particular ties or attachments or expressions. And there's just a merger of consciousness with the universal I amness, or the great causal body. Without a feeling of having suppressed anything, it's just a feeling. So it's not like a, oh, fuck creation, fuck the world, fuck all these stupid people, I no longer want to be of service to them. That's not that state. That's somewhere in the shepherd. The shepherd will experience that many times back and forth as it balances love and wisdom and acceptance and courage and persistence and all that. But the mirror has done that many times. Rejected, resisted the world, re-embraced the world, resisted the world, re-embraced the world, resisted its own journey and its own theme, and embraced its own theme and its own journey, etc. To such a degree where everything has been integrated. So now there's this wholeness, this vibration around this mind-body-spirit complex is one of unified wholeness, balance, unity, sixth density, the density of unity or balance between love and wisdom, love and light. And so now, one as an individuated spark, already very clearly able to recognize the unity of all things, but still carrying sort of a shell or veil of individuated thought, knowledge, memory, position. There's still a position of some kind. Even though it's very transparent to God, there's still a locus that's being maintained, a focus that's being maintained. Now this gravitational potency of the truth is so obvious, one feels completed in one's journey as an individual, and one's willingly lets go of all memory in order to become unified with the awareness that is the essence of all that is. This changes one's expression through the body into the world to take on more that shape of the mirror. So this doesn't mean that, especially in incarnation, I kind of described it post-incarnation or beyond incarnation, like at a sort of a trans-incarnational level, is what I just described it as. But how that is reflected during incarnation, when one has access to those states of consciousness or has matured commensurate to with what I just described, the soul's journey, that can be the case while one is incarnate. That can be resembled here. That can be reflected here. That can be represented while here also. So then the way that this shape takes form, or the functionality changes from the shepherd, is one, it's like the difference between being a ray of the sun that's enlightening this and enlightening that and giving here, giving that, to just being the sun that radiates equally in all directions. One becomes radiant in a unified way, in an equal way, if you will, equally radiant in all directions. The preferences really begin to take a backseat. Again, doesn't mean that you wouldn't prefer certain foods over other foods, but that's a more relative type of wisdom or discernment that doesn't have to be thrown overboard in order to have no actual preferences at a psychological level. So appreciate that distinction. Doesn't mean you will never eat again or that you'll never have a preference again at a relative level. But it means there's no attachment to any of that, and that spontaneously, contextually decides upon itself. Oh, this feels better now. Boom. Oh, look, he had a preference. No, not really. Yes, and not really. So make that distinction. Don't try to base a picture of no preferences onto a relative contextual life. There's still going to be preferences contextually. But at a more core level, psychologically, in the heart of that beingness, there is an equal love, an equal radiance, a divine, godly radiance for all things and all beings. There's a perfection that is known all the time. It's just like being the sun instead of being a ray of the sun that's hitting a particular portion of the planet. Where the shepherd can also mirror and is also mirroring other people, and the person also mirrors other people, they just really don't know that they're doing it. It's in a very unconscious way, and the mirroring happens through all of their own angers and anxieties and biases and preferences and fears. The shepherd opens that up a little bit, so its functionality becomes that of shepherding, but it's not quite mirroring yet. We can't quite call it mirroring, because it's kind of like they're mirroring, but it's a distorted mirror, like you'd find at a fair or at a circus or something, where other people can come in front of the mirror of the shepherd, but it's a little bit wobbly, so they can make out more things about themselves. They can be benefited in that way, but there's still some distortion of the individual present there, and quite a bit in the lower stages, because a lot of the person is brought with you into the early stages of wanting to be a shepherd. So another analogy for it is like the mirror doesn't have anyone standing behind the mirror looking through this sort of FBI mirror where you can see through from one side, but the others only see what's reflected. And the shepherd is kind of like standing behind that mirror and still kind of discerning and taking things personally from what it's reflecting and what it's seeing. It's still learning a lot in a polarized way, like good, bad, positive, negative, male, female, this, that, preference, no preference, justice, injustice, all those polarities. They're still active in the shepherd's internal beingness. They're still learning to distill from that the unification of all of it, the unity which resolves all these paradoxes. The mirror, although it has the same functionality, meaning it's still, essentially, it's still mirroring, it's still granting enlightenment to the world, if you will. That person behind that mirror is either so thin, or you could say non-existent, that the mirroring really just happens purely, contextually on its own, as if on automatic pilot. It's just the intelligence that just knows what to do, what to say, when to say it. And it can appear in all kinds of ways without the mirror interrupting that process or filtering or like, oh, I prefer not to come across this way or that way. Or oh, shit, oh, they think that of me and this of me. That's the shepherd in us. The mirror radiates as God and appreciates that contextually their mind and body are now being used as clean mirrors for the world to see its own face in. So sometimes what's reflected in the mirror is not a pretty picture, because the ones standing in front of the mirror have a lot of distortions, and it's not that pretty. So then that reflects badly on the mirror. The shepherd takes that personally. The mirror being does not. Main difference. Because love and wisdom has been balanced, integrated, and one has dissolved to a very great extent its identity as an individual, and knows, resonates with the knowledge that it is all that is. It is God, it is Brahman, it is the great causal body, it is the great illuminating body of all other bodies. And therefore it doesn't take things personally in the way that the shepherd does. And when it does take things personally at times, that's kind of the remnants of the shepherd. Just like the shepherd carries with it a lot of remnants of the person that it's dealing with. So one can be predominantly in the state of mirror consciousness. Very rare, please don't claim this. Very rare already. Please don't go and like, oh, that's so cool. And yes, I've reflected my partner from time to time, and like, oh, I'm feeling these emotions that are not always mine, so I must be a mirror. Please no. Please just don't. Okay? Stay radically honest and humble with your journey. You do not get to claim this unless you know for sure that this is the case, and even then you won't want to claim it. It's just a description to make you aware of what's possible and what's probable and how the journey leads into more of itself as it becomes more transparent. So don't claim this. Don't go be arrogant about this, please. Don't distort my teachings and claim all these things. Thank you. So, the mirror could be seen as the pure beingness that is virtually one with God consciousness. There might still be some shades, some distortions, but they're so minimal and they're so governed by that own beingness that it really doesn't have a negative effect on its expressions, so to speak. So that's the mirror. It's the beingness who is no longer actively seeking anything out of its relation with polarity and duality, and therefore the world of variety. It is saturated with and wants only more of God consciousness. As a result, its mind and body become like mirrors, like clear mirrors to its environment and to the world. And then beyond that, as I said, I've dabbled in this, but I don't want to speak too much on this until I've decided to deepen my own experience of this, for lack of a better word. And this is what I call the gateway being, where the mirror is kind of in between the world of creation and the God state, or God state kind of is in between the world of creation and the absolute, the infinite, the true absolute reality source. The gateway has gone beyond that. And even the God body, even the great causal body, has, for lack of a better word, dissolved itself. The identity is sucked out of it through the black hole. And now all there is the one infinite perfection. One does not see anything but that. When that's the case, or even for how long that's the case, if one has a glimpse of that, or an exclusive realization of that for that period of time, one becomes almost like a black hole. The functionality in the world becomes like a vortex. The energy field assumes the form of a tear in the veil of the matrix, if you will, where the God state represents itself by a radiance of just equal love light. Doesn't mean there is no radiance in the gateway being's aura, if you will, but there's a profound quality of like a vortex in the water that's sucking everything in. So, hence the gateway. So it radiates a frequency of beyondness, of going beyond everything. It's very powerful, very potent. Yes. So, and also, it's not greatly relevant for where humanity is at large, and even where the shepherds are at, and the adepts and the wanderers and all that. But it is part of this. Again, the functionality changes from that of the mirror, and therefore it deserves its own distinction. So up to you to discern what you are and where you're at and what feels relevant for you, but appreciating your whole journey. You can probably see that most of you are somewhere in the shepherding range. Your desire is to be of service. Your desire is to know more of the Creator. There's remnants of your personality that are acting up. You're reactive sometimes. You're triggered. You're emotional. You're fear-based from time to time. All good. Don't judge it. My desire behind giving these discernments is not to judge yourself by it. That would be another person consciousness thing to do, and low-level shepherd thing to do, or early-stage shepherd thing to do. So don't judge yourself. Love yourself, accept yourself, appreciate the depth of this journey, and just marvel at it. That alone will catapult you out of this sort of box of I'm a body and a mind inside of a world, and you just appreciate the infinity even of the illusion itself, the endlessness and the foreverness, and the depth and the dimensionalities of this illusion itself. Whoa. That already expands your consciousness. Might not fully unify it with God consciousness, but it gets closer. To have that full appreciation, to allow for integration to happen, and for your ascension, if you will, or expansion to happen at your own pace, and to love yourself throughout that process is awesome, beautiful, awe-inspiring. Now, the more you focus on I am, the more all this naturally happens and accelerates. Everything, all of this. And I've only touched upon a pinch of salt of all of that. I can't possibly describe. You can only experience it intuitively in awe of as the mystery. You can tap into it by not knowing anything, and just knowing you don't know anything, but having a sense of the scope of this magnificent, weird, mysterious illusion. That's the Creator expressing itself in symbolized form. And you can begin to unify yourself and be more of service to others, and therefore use polarity to your advantage and to the advantage of others by becoming an ever clearer, pure shepherd of love and light, tuning ever more to that radiance of unconditional love and light, which is the hallmark, the principle of creation itself, of the great causal body. So definitely continue your meditations. They are not self-centered. Well, they might be self-centered, but they're not selfish. Sometimes you have to deepen being centered on yourself in order to take that elevator up to the next level and be able to then radiate and express that more full-heartedly. And then get the reflections, learn, distill, optimize, be honest with yourself, forgive yourself, forgive and love others. Go back in, assess all that information, integrate it, take the elevator, meditate back on the Creator once again, the oneness of all things, achieve higher levels of love and light and bliss and intuition. And then again, allow that to flow out into the world. Be of service, actively. Do your best. You'll learn along the way. And again, boom. This could be on a daily basis, daily meditation, daily expression, daily learning, integration, daily meditation, daily expression, daily learning, distilling and integration, daily meditation, daily expression. And you can see it as greater sequences also, like every month or 2 or 3, you go through another stage. And the more you meditate on the fact that everything is God, the faster all the learning happens. But don't make it black or white, because it's unrealistic for a person to jump to the mirror stage, let alone the gateway stage. It's unrealistic, my friends. It's unrealistic. It's not going to happen. And there's no harm in saying this, because if you want to defy that, and you're really the one to defy that, then you will anyway. You're not going to be bogged down by whatever I say as a limitation. But you got to appreciate, you see, you've got to appreciate the journey of it. Even though essentially, yes, that's an illusion. But while you are interacting with these components, and while you're not willing to actually give up everything, all your memory, all your pains, resolve everything, accept everything all at once, radically, powerfully, boom. Everything. And that too. Yeah, but what about, no, that too. You're not going to do that. And if you are, then congratulations. You've defied my statement here, and I applaud you. But you're not going to do that. Even if you think you are, you're not going to do it. And if you are, then you are. And then there's no harm in my statement. So accept yourself. Very important. Don't suppress. Don't try to run away from things. Meditate more and more on the love and light that makes up everything, unify everything, accept everything, understand everything, and go beyond. And repeat and go beyond. And repeat and go beyond and repeat. This way you don't have to go back, come back, create a whole other temporary experience, timeline, reality, lifetime, what have you, to kind of resolve the things you had suppressed. Just allow everything to be as it is. Allow everything to be worthy of acceptance and light. Is not everything made of love and light? How can you rest in the God state? Oh, I'm all with one that is, but I'd rather not look at this. That's not acceptable. But I'm the all-accepting love and light of the Creator. See, you got to let go of all your memories and resistances to everything if you want to be there virtually instantaneously. If you want to embody it instantaneously, you already are that right now. And the recognition that you already are that, if made profound and meditative, like real, like really recognize that love and light and awareness and perfection is already the case in and throughout everything you could ever think or feel or do. Then there is a shift in identity from your preferences and biases and personalities to that God state very rapidly. But for the time being, while you are still waking up and interacting with the world, as I still am also to some degree, some periods more and some periods much less. But nevertheless, there is still an interactive experience. There's still a veiled illusion going on that I agree to have, that I've chosen to have. I still saw purpose in it. I still saw relevance in it. And so that's a duty, that's an honor, that's a desire that I honor. Hence, I'll have to be skillful with my interactions or allow skillfulness to happen through me in my interactions with these components. Therefore, it is helpful for you to know about things like law of attraction and the integration of suppressed emotions and all that. That has its place and its time and it should be integrated. But it's not the main focus. The main focus in what I'm advertising anyway should be the unity of all things. Because that's the fastest route to the true realization, the true liberation, the true happiness, and the true service that you can deliver. It's your potential. Activate your highest potential by focusing on the Son of God, the Son of the Self, the Son that is God. That pure awareness, love, light, where there is no polarity, there is no duality, there is only unconditional love. Merge with that as best you can, as often as you can. Make that your predominant focus. But you will find that that doesn't happen in one day for most of you, for almost all of you, for probably all of you listening here today. Again, prove me wrong if you want to. I'd be happy for you to do that in a balanced way, hopefully. So, meantime, while you are deepening your dissolution, your understanding of the unity of all things, your dissolution of individuation, in a way, because it doesn't I won't go into that too much now, but it's not like you lose the self of the individual. But yeah, it is the experience of dissolution. It feels like you're dissolving into all that is. But nothing is ever truly lost, including individuation, in a way. But this gets too technical and subtle to talk about right now. So, for all intents and purposes, it is like the drop merging with the ocean, the drop of water again, like realizing its unity and becoming more and more of that unity. This is the great healer, the great illuminator, the great accelerator, the great activator of your truest potential, your brightest light. And while you are on that journey, it's not black or white. You're not wrong when you're not in that state. Things are not nasty when you're not in that state. Things are not to be suppressed while you're not successful. If you have an off day, it's got to be appreciated for what it is. This too is part and parcel. It's not separate from the one infinite absolute. It doesn't even really exist. So how could it be separate from it? Right now you're living the one. You are the one. So why resist anything? You got to appreciate the journey. You got to appreciate yourself as this ongoing eternal soul with the complexities and flavors and nuances. If you appreciate that, I guarantee you the integration process will accelerate, become much more harmonious, and your foundation, also here on earth, energetically, vibrationally, will be one of stability, clarity, relatability, functionality. And while you're interacting and you're forgetting the God state, it is helpful to kind of understand what's happening and how things work, and that you're attempting to be a shepherd and that some things need to be integrated and looked at, etc. So appreciate that too. But I would advertise, promote, recommend from personal experience that you make your predominant focus God, the creator, the allness of all things. Continue to repeat this internally to yourself and sometimes externally. Everything is me. Everything is that. Everything is the great causal self. Everything is the sun that is God. Everything is Brahman. Everything is I am. I am is all that is. All that is I am. Boom, boom, boom. Meditate on this I amness, and let go more and more in a loving way, accepting way. Like, oh, I thought I am was this body. Now I see I am is purely I am, and the I am, the light of that I am, enables the perception of the body. I just became associated with the perception produced from the light of I am. And now I'm freer from that association. Oh, and here a suppressed thought comes up. Oh, and this body identity has felt for so long like a victim of this, or like suppressed, or not loved, or not seen by my parents, or not this, or not that, or abused by my partner, or this or that. There's no like, oh, you don't have to suppress that. It's not real. So allow it, revel in the flavor of it for a bit, understand where it comes from, understand the root misperception that generates that misaligned emotion, that emotion rooted in lack and victimization and separation. Bring the light of your meditations, of your love and light, of the knowledge that that too is the I am, illuminating itself in this particular way. Bring that light into that experience. Love it, accept it, take a little minute out of your day to love and accept it, appreciate it. Ooh, let it run through, let it be, and see again that it's made of awareness, love, light. This is how you resolve these things very quickly. This is why it's the great unifying healer and accelerator. It heals everything, and it accelerates the healing of everything because it brings up things faster. And if you're willing to recognize them and appreciate them, then that can be greatly accelerated through this practice. Oh Lord, I've talked so much, there's no time for questions left. I hope I answered most of whatever questions you had. I know there was a lot here, so review it in your own time. Trust that things have been understood. Take what resonates. By all means, leave what does not resonate. This is just my version of things. This is my experience, and I've distilled from that what I believe is relevant for most seekers, and I am honoring my duty and honor to attempt to communicate that through my bodies to your bodies. But it is all consciousness speaking to itself. We'll have a minute or two of silence, resting, basking in the perfection, the great, natural, intrinsic, inseparable, inescapable, already here-ness of the perfection, the great perfection of all things, exactly as they appear to be, illusory as they are, made of the perfected love and light which we call God, or I am, the light of beingness, the light of pure, limitless isness. Unity resolves all paradoxes and heals all distortions. Don't get too lost in the distortions. Don't indulge them. At the same time, don't suppress them. That's the balanced route. That's the integrated path. That's the holistic view, and it is by far the fastest, in my opinion, because you don't fall back as much as when you do suppress. And you don't get lost as much as when you do indulge. So don't believe in the stories you believe in. Very important, don't indulge. But allow the appearances to be understood, to be seen through. Find the root perception that causes these misaligned emotions and biases. Accept them as being an expression, a ray of the Son of God. See them as awareness, love, light. See them as manifestations or appearances of the I Am. And that's the fastest way to true healing, true integration, true unification. And only the unified self or individual can full-heartedly, truly, genuinely begin to merge with the allness, the godness, and begin to glimpse from that state of allness or godness the absolute source of even that allness or godness. I love you. I feel you. That's why I'm here. I know you. I know your challenges. I know your desires. I know your potential. And I know what you are. And if I know that, a stranger, then most definitely you can know all that very clearly for yourself. We are one. Literally. Actually. One. How could I not love you? How could I not accept you? And how could I not, for the time being, open my mouth when a question appears or a need presents itself? Seem to be at. Knowing that that's only the activation, the active level of the potential of what you really already essentially are. And at different stages, you activate a different portion of that completion, that totality, that divine God self. And we're here to explore how we can gain greater access, more direct, intimate knowledge of ourselves as that completion, as that potential. And allow for the active focus points that arise throughout the day and throughout the years to be as they may, to come and go as they please, while we rest evermore in the ever-present, stable freedom of the all, the one, you, your true I amness already, at the very, very deepest core of your beingness. That which is the I exists, the I am, is God. It's the great causal body, the sun. That awareness, love, light, knows no polarity, knows only its own unity, its own endlessness, its own perfection. It's all good. There are no mistakes. Trust. Trust the journey. Trust yourself. Be well. See you soon.